Hey everyone, it is Wednesday at noon. You are watching CBC News BC. I'm Jessica Chung here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here are your top stories right now. The Kitsilano outdoor pool will remain closed for the summer. Now, this comes after the opening of the pool was teased a few times. The city of Vancouver says even after repairs made during the off-season, which you can see right here, this photo is from mid-May, the pool is still losing a substantial amount of water, making it impossible to balance pool chemicals. So Vancouver Coastal Health said that the pool can't operate safely in its current state. And the city says it will be extending operating hours at Second Beach Pool throughout the summer in response to the closure. And a 32-year-old man is dead after being stabbed early this morning in East Vancouver. Now, it happened just before 3:30 a.m. Police got reports of a man in medical distress on Union Street and Main Street. And when crews got there, they found a man that had been stabbed, and he unfortunately died on scene. And police say that they are still, no arrests have been made, and they're asking anyone with information to come forward. And the search for 3 missing mountaineers is restarting today after good weather is prompting search crews to start their search again today. The last 4 days, we had some difficult conditions that put those rescue efforts on hold. And the trio of mountaineers were reported missing on Friday after heading to Atwell Peak on Mount Garibaldi. And crews of Squamish Search and Rescue say they will try to get to the area by air this afternoon. And there are more than 2,500 lives lost to the overdose crisis last year. And a disproportionate number of those worked in the trades, about 20% of deaths. Now, an advocacy group for construction workers is calling to make nasal naloxone available to all construction sites in the province.
People get injured, they go to their doctor, they get prescribed opioids. They take those opioids so that they can maintain and continue to provide for their families and contribute to our economy. That can become a substance dependency so that they can keep going, because the injury only gets worse as you continue to, perform your job. And that substance dependency can quickly become substance abuse.
And Kinsella says that nasal kits would be easier to use for workers who wear heavy gear, says that gear often has to be removed in order to use standard needle kits. And the Bank of Canada has dropped its benchmark interest rate this morning by 0.25%. It's the first time in 4 years that the central bank has done so, and it says the drop is due to inflation easing. So, what will this mean for the average consumer?
Lower interest rates typically lead to increased consumer spending as borrowing becomes more affordable. For many of them who had a high share of their disposable income being eaten by interest payments, this is also welcome relief. And also for small businesses, many of them were struggling to cope with this very high interest rate environment. Now they can manage more easily daily expenses.
The Bank of Canada says Canadians can expect more cuts as inflation continues to ease. And that's it for us. I am Jessica Chung. You are watching CBC News BC. Now stay with us for more continuous news and much more. BC Today is up next with Michelle Elliott. She's just up there. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The big news today, the key interest rate drops to 4.75%. It's the first rate cut since March of 2020. Will that make a difference for you, your debt payments, or your monthly mortgage? Could it make buying a home any easier? We'll talk money matters this hour. First, we go to Squamish, just north, and that search for mountaineers who have been missing for 5 days. That's up first. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app. You can also watch us on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver, and you can subscribe to us there. And you can call us now on our top story this hour. The Bank of Canada is cutting its key interest rate for the first time in 4 years. Will today's interest rate cut make a difference for you? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. First, to just north of Squamish now. Weather could help today as rescue crews hope to resume their search for 3 climbers in Garibaldi Park north of Squamish. Tough weather conditions and avalanche risk had forced searchers to hold off, and the mountaineers were last seen near Atwell Peak and have been missing for 5 days. Our John Hernandez joins us now from just outside of Squamish. Hi, John.
Hi, Michelle.
What are the plans today?
Yeah, so crews are staging at the Squamish Airport right now. There are vehicles parked there, as well as a number of helicopters. The hope is that some clear weather this afternoon will mean that those helicopters can take to the skies and do an avalanche assessment. They need to fly over that area and basically deem it safe for crews to then begin traversing some of that steep terrain by foot. We understand it's very complex terrain out there, so they just want to make sure it's as safe as possible before they can get crews up there.
Tell us more about the 3 mountaineers. What can you tell us? When were they last seen? Where? And what are the conditions that they're facing?
Yeah, they were last seen Friday morning. They were set to scale Atwell Peak. That's about a 2,600 meter climb, alpine region just south of Garibaldi Lake. And what search and rescue crews have told us was that these climbers, these mountaineers, were actually quite experienced. They did have all the necessary gear and equipment to traverse Atwell Peak. We understand that only a handful of people do make that summit each year just because it's so complicated. It's not something that your average hiker would try to undertake. Unfortunately, they weren't seen or heard from since Friday morning, reported missing after they didn't return. So unfortunate situation.
Yeah, certainly. And how big is this operation? What can you tell us about what is involved?
Yeah, we understand there's a number of helicopters that will hope to take to the sky today. But, you know, the weather has really played a big role in sort of preventing this effort from getting off the ground. As we've seen sort of throughout the region, we've had a lot of that rain and cloud, and that gets sort of exacerbated a bit higher elevation that you go. So these helicopters haven't been able to take off the ground safely. A lot of this fog really hampering that search effort. So all things go to plan today with some of the clear skies that we're seeing. They'll get up there and hopefully hit the ground running today.
Certainly an unfortunate situation. We'll watch to see, and hopefully they are able to resume their operation. John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is the CBC's John Hernandez, live from just outside Squamish. It is 12:10 now Pacific time. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And we're also live on CBC television and on YouTube. Well, today's Bank of Canada interest rate cut was not unexpected, but it appears to largely be welcome news nonetheless. It is the first rate cut since March of 2020. And over the last couple of years, the central bank has raised interest rates 10 times, eventually to 5% last July. Now, the rate cut is just 25 basis points to 4.75%, but further cuts are expected. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem made the highly anticipated announcement this morning in the wake of inflation slowing to 2.7% in April. Lots of reaction coming in today. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland was just speaking in the House and called it great news. Meanwhile, the union group Unifor has been highly critical of the Bank of Canada's interest rate hikes, saying that workers needed some relief. Well, today, Unifor National President Lana Payne posted on X, Finally, the decrease is small, but much needed and long overdue. It's finally a signal that the Bank of Canada might ease the chokehold it's imposed on workers in the economy. And for workers, this is a signal that perhaps things will become more affordable. We will hear from Unifor toward the end of the program at about 12:50 Pacific time. We're asking you this hour on the show, what difference will the interest rate cut make for you? Will they make things more affordable? Will it help you with your debt, your mortgage, if you're an individual and you'd like to talk about your personal budget? If you're a small business owner, will this help you out as well? Are you seeing signs of that slowing inflation, some lower prices around you? You can call us 1-800-825-5950.
The Governing Council decided monetary policy no longer needs to be as restrictive and lowered the policy rate by 25 basis points to 4.75%. We've come a long way in the fight against inflation, and our confidence that inflation will continue to move closer to the 2% target has increased in recent months.
That is Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem speaking today in Ottawa. And we're asking you on the open line, how will today's interest rate cut impact you? Does it prompt you to take any next steps? And as inflation eases, have you noticed a difference in the prices that you pay? We'd love to hear from you on the open line, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, and that's bctoday@cbc.ca. And love to hear from you. We're speaking on this throughout the hour here on the program. I have two guests joining me. Murray Baker is Manager of Financial Empowerment at the Family Services of Greater Vancouver. And Steve Ng is a mortgage specialist with TD Bank. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for joining us. Steve, I hear your phone was just buzzing this morning.
To say the least, yeah.
What are the calls that you're getting? What are people saying?
I think people just wanted to know what the impacts of today's news is. It's like you said, it's been some time since we've seen any kind of relief in interest rates. In fact, it's been 11 months since the Bank of Canada made their last increase. So it's kind of like.
But who's counting, right?
Yeah. A lot of us are, only that we're treating this kind of like Christmas Eve, although Christmas Eve has been like 11 months in the making.
Right. Yeah. Well, what do you see as the impact on your clients? Just the immediate impact of a 0.25 points basis decrease.
Yeah, I think the impact is more psychological than it is finances. I mean, from a home ownership or a mortgage perspective, variable rate holders will see immediate relief in their interest payments. Their payments won't necessarily change by much, but more of their payment will go towards principal as opposed to interest, and ideally shortening the lifespan of that mortgage. But like I said, I think more of the impact is psychological. The Bank of Canada has been really been kind of emphasizing that rhetoric around making sure that we're in a good place, making sure that we're not going to fall back into potentially high inflationary territory. So now we're at the place now where I think we're past that apex point, and now we just need to slowly get back to where we need to be, which is where the Bank of Canada wants to see us in that kind of 2% range.
Right, and 2.7% in April, so they figure that's close enough. Now, you say the impact of today's cut is psychological. What has been the impact of the rate increases over those last couple of years? Not psychological, I imagine.
No, more stressful, I would say. TD actually held a survey recently, and the survey revealed that British Columbians, an overwhelming amount of them, 48%, were experiencing some sort of level of stress or anxiety when it came to these heightened levels of interest and just uncertainty as to what the future may hold. So that was really interesting.
But did they see, their actual payments, increase to a point where they just couldn't keep up?
Yeah, there were certainly cases, again, with the variable rate mortgages. If you have one of those that does adjust with the interest rate, your payments could have gone up quite dramatically, and in some cases by 2 or more than 2 times as much.
Wow. Murray Baker, I'll go to you now. We've checked in with both of you just sort of all throughout these last couple of years, right? For your clients at the Family Services of Greater Vancouver, what would have impacted them more? Would it have been the interest rates, or would it have been, the cost of living and inflation?
Well, certainly the cost of living has been impacting our clients, particularly in the areas of food and also accommodation. There were some bright spots in the April inflation numbers, and that food was actually increasing at a lower rate than overall inflation. So that was the good news. One of the areas, though, that is still stubbornly high for many of the clients that we see who are by and large renters is the increasing rent. So one of the areas with the decrease in interest rates is it lessens to some extent the pressure on landlords in terms of making their mortgage payments, because what we have seen is some landlords feeling stressed or unable to make mortgage, so they end up selling. Oftentimes that results in the eviction of their tenant, and that those tenants have, in many cases, been facing increases in rent of 50 to 70 or 80% over what they were paying.
Right. We did hear about that, the impact of increasing interest rates trickling down to renters and them, bearing that increase themselves as well. So what do you think might be the effect of today's rate cut announcement then?
Well, I think it'll be a gradual effect, but certainly the one area that I'm hopeful is that the decrease in pressure for landlords to sell and resulting in evictions. The other that we hope as well is some of the recent budget announcements in terms of some of the measures they're taking to increase the housing supply. Those two in tandem, I think over time, we won't see immediate impact, but I think over time that'll have an impact in lessening the housing affordability pressure.
Okay, my guests for the hour, Murray Baker, Manager of Financial Empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. Steve Ng is a mortgage specialist at TD Bank. Wondering how today's interest rate cut, the first one in years here in Canada, Canada's central bank, in fact, being the first of the G7 countries to cut rates. What impact does that have on you? Are you thinking about your monthly mortgage payments? Are you renegotiating anytime soon and wondering about that as well, and whether this makes things easier for you? Have you been hoping to buy? Does that kind of get you one step closer? We'd love to hear from you. And what are the prices that you're seeing right now? What's been the impact of inflation and of interest rates over these last couple of years on you? We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. Scott is writing us, regardless of interest rates, real estate prices have exceeded the cash flow ability of employees in BC. Scott, thank you very much. So Steve, there's interest rates and there's just the prices of real estate, and we know that there's been a slowdown in the market over the last month. But Murray just referred to some of the housing measures that we've seen. How are people? How has housing become more affordable or not? Still, does this get us anywhere closer to that?
It most certainly gets us a little bit closer, but not anywhere near where we need to be. Absolutely. I mean, like we just alluded to, housing prices are a clear, I guess, byproduct of what supply is like, and the supply here isn't nearly as much as what it could be and should be, and it will take some years to get to that level where we have enough supply to be able to support our housing needs. We talked about some of the recent government changes. The Airbnb changes that have been made locally.
Limits on Airbnbs?
Yeah, that'll drive supply back into the market. Most certainly it will. But the people that have purchased these homes have purchased it already at high prices. and they could ill afford really to sell them at discount. So you're not going to really see the price discounts that a lot of Canadians or British Columbians are going to be looking for.
What is your advice just off the top? How should people respond to this? What kinds of plans should they be making, or what further signs should they be looking for if they're thinking about selling or buying?
Yeah, when further signs, our survey actually did ask that question. And interestingly enough, there were 82% of British Columbians that were looking for reduced prices to jump back into the housing market.
Right.
63% were looking for reduced interest rates, so we're starting to see that now. But there was a good 30% of British Columbians that need that support from family and friends to get into the housing market. So that still is a large component of a decision making that people need, and they need assistance to get into the market. Saving up for a down payment's not a small prospect, even if it is 5% on $1 million mortgage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just put out our numbers once again, because we're asking you, do you have a question about what you might do next? What are the factors you're considering? How much does the interest rate weigh on any of your plans when it comes to a home? I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And my guests are Murray Baker with Family Services of Greater Vancouver, Steve Ing with TD Bank. And Murray, what advice would you have then? Because, part of hiking interest rates is to sort of quell consumer spending and slow it down to a point. So when people see interest rates going down, what is your advice? Do you worry that people might then, get into the habit of spending more, or be encouraged to spend more and get into debt?
Yeah, that's always a danger, and it's always a fine line when the Bank of Canada makes their decision. They don't want to encourage people to take on more debt. We always encourage people to continue to try and pay down any debt they have. Interest rates down 0.25%, but they're still historically high. So we encourage people to, if they have the extra cash, to pay that down, and also taking on any new debt. One of the things that we've seen with the last few years is people taking on high interest debt. Predatory lenders, payday loans, those have been a real problem for many who were really taking out loans just to make ends meet for day-to-day expenses. And also to avoid another sort of product in the marketplace is the buy now, pay later, which there's been some focus on that, and it's showing that people are taking those buy now, pay later on, and it's actually working to the detriment of their financial situation. So we always encourage people to really think twice before you go that route.
Okay, it sounds like sound advice. So hold off on taking on more debt. Put any incoming money to paying down your current debt. Let's take a call from Lori in Kelowna. Hi, Lori.
Hi, how are you this afternoon?
I am just fine. How are you doing?
Great. Pretty good. I live outside of Kelowna in a rural area, and I'm part of a volunteer organization that helps out struggling.
Pardon me. You're part of a charitable organization?
Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing that we assist families, individuals that are having problems.
Okay.
And struggling with finances.
You assist families. Okay.
Yeah. And this rate reduction.
Lori, I'm just going to move on to the next caller for now, but we're just going to try and fix your connection, okay? Because I'd love to hear from you. It sounds like you work with families in need, and you have some comments on what impact this rate reduction will have. So we're going to put you on hold, Lori, and fix that connection so we can hear you much more clearly. My apologies for that. Art is next in West Kelowna. Hi there, Art. What are your thoughts or questions about the interest rate cut? It sounds like we're having some trouble with our phone lines right now. Art, are you there?
As far as how to input that.
Okay. We seem to be having some issues with our phone lines. My apologies for that. We're trying to fix our connection with Lori in Kelowna and hope to connect with Art in West Kelowna. Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. We also have email, and that is working right now. And Joanne is emailing us to write, this has been front and center in the news and in question period with the Liberals taking full credit for the cut, yet the Bank of Canada is still doing the wait and see what happens with inflation and with meeting the 2.0 target. And Canada is sitting again at 2.7%. Now, personally, this is not going to make a huge difference for most families who were locked in when the rate was increasing. And to get out and pay penalties is not the answer. Everything is going up. Property taxes, services for water and sewer, home insurance, car insurance, even with a rebate for many drivers. Then there's food, gas, and the list goes on. This 0.2, 0.5 is not going to change anything for most families. But if they cut the rate by 1 to 2%, that might help some families. Okay, really interesting points there, Joanne. We're going to try and go back to calls in a moment here, but I'd love to put that point to Steve here, saying for most families who have been locked in when the rate was increasing, what about the idea of going back and renegotiating right now and paying those penalties? How much of an option is that?
There is an option to do that, although paying out your mortgage and paying out a penalty, I think you have to think about what your objective ultimately is. There's a lot of people that do need to upsize or downsize. So rather than paying your penalty, perhaps maybe port your mortgage or take that mortgage with you to another property. Your local financial institution will have different options available to you. But yeah, paying the penalty isn't always the best and only option that there is. There are different options, most certainly.
Okay. Joanne, that's a really good point. Thanks for raising it. Our phones are fixed now. Yes, I'm happy to announce Art is joining us now from West Kelowna. Hi, Art.
How are you today?
I am much better now that we've connected with you. How are you doing?
Well, I'm sitting on needles and pins. I got a mortgage coming due in 90 days. I had 1.59% I took out in 2019. It's coming due. At 5 points, it's going to go up 3.5%. 800,000 mortgage, that's an extra 26,000 a year in interest alone, which is an extra $2,000 a month.
Wow.
So, I don't know whether to go lock in or whether to do variable. So.
Yeah, and there are so many Canadians who are renegotiating over this next couple of years, right?
Absolutely.
You're one of very many, Art. So
that's just the interest, 26,000.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. So should you be looking at variable or fixed rate? You're due to renegotiate in 90 days, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Steve, I know you can give some general advice here.
Yeah, hold on to that mortgage rate of 1 percentage point as long as you can. Yeah. But your situation is not any different than most Canadians out there. Most of the low interest rates mortgages occurred during the pandemic years of 2021 and 2022. And a lot of those mortgages are coming due. In fact, 76% of mortgages are maturing in 2026. And we do estimate that by the end of 2026, 98% of Canadians will have a higher mortgage payment than they did previously when they had their mortgage. So the best advice I can give you is to absolutely assess your own situation and speak to your financial institution. There's pros and cons for sure of going short-term or long-term, as well as taking out a variable or fixed rate. Your variable rates are historically have been lower, but currently they are much higher than your fixed rates. So aside from the interest rate alone, I think the other important thing that many people put as a priority is cash flow. Like you said, $26,000 more, $2,000 a month, $26,000 in interest alone is a lot. And if cash flow is an issue, we can look at things like amortization, maybe the type of term, take out a longer term to reduce the rate. So those are options that are all available that we can happily calculate and figure out what works for you as an individual.
Okay, I appreciate your being on pins and needles, Art.
Thank you.
I hope that helps. That was quite a fulsome answer. Thank you, Steve and Art. All the best to you. Thanks so much for calling in.
Thank you.
That's Art in West Kelowna. It's 12:31 now Pacific time. We're taking your calls here throughout the hour on BC Today and asking you what impact will today's interest rate cut, big news coming out of Bank of Canada, lowering the interest rate to 4.75%, the first cut in 4 years. And as you know, we've seen repeat interest rate hikes over the last couple of years. So wanting to know what today's turn will mean for you. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And my guests with me are Murray Baker with Family Services of Greater Vancouver, the manager of financial empowerment there, and Steve Ng, mortgage specialist with TD Bank. They'll join me in our next half hour. Right now, it is time for a CBC News update, and here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. BC's Seniors Advocate says many seniors are falling through cracks in the province's existing support systems as they face the high cost of living. Dan Levitt says 1 in 4 seniors in BC have an annual income of less than $23,000, and many are increasingly at risk of homelessness. As we've been hearing on the show, the Bank of Canada has made its first interest rate cut in 4 years. The overnight rate was trimmed by 25 basis points to 4.75%. Canada is the first G7 country so far to ease its monetary policy this year. And rescue crews here in BC are hoping conditions will improve this afternoon to continue their search for 3 climbers missing since Friday. They were last seen near Mount Garibaldi outside Squamish. Search officials say communication is spotty in the area, even with satellite phones. And now the forecast on the north coast. Showers this afternoon with a high of 10. Highs to 18 with sunshine and strong winds in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a high of 16 with a chance of showers and thunderstorms. Highs up to 20 degrees with some sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 22. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, sunshine this afternoon with highs around 17. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
I'm still getting crow stories.
Are you?
After our conversation yesterday, yes, people were really attuned to listening about crow behavior. And in fact, someone came up to me today saying, I'm just like Rob's partner. You know, I do feed. You're not supposed to feed wildlife to everybody. That's just a rule. But she's kind of made friends with her neighborhood crows as well. They come to visit and look her in the eye.
Yeah, no, they're super chatty and super friendly, actually. Actually, our neighbor 2 houses down, she actually wrote a book. Deborah, hello, Deborah. She wrote a book of poems about crows. So
yes, and someone emailed us saying you should talk to June Hunter, who's the artist who specializes in crows as well. Vancouver, you know a lot about crows. Canuck the crow is our biggest celebrity of 2022.
Sadly, yes.
Yes. Now, I also got this email from Karina who wrote, out of nowhere, a crow has adopted my dog. He sits with the dog all day. The crow has been taking food from my hand since the first day. Okay, we are learning a lot about people's behaviors here. I find it interesting that this crow has trusted us from the first encounter. If I don't see him right away, he makes the sweetest little cooing sound to alert me to his arrival. We are honored to be an interspecies family.
Nice.
There you go. They're not just friends, they're family. Okay, once again, don't feed wildlife, but thanks for your stories. You can feed us your stories, though. Rob, thanks so much.
Sure.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Hello, Deborah. This is BC Today, live on CBC Radio, on CBC Television, live streaming too. You can find us on the CBC News app. Just hit the video tag there. And if you go to YouTube, you can watch us as well at CBC Vancouver. And while you're there, why don't you hit that subscribe button, as they say. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. Now we're taking your calls on today's interest rate cut by the Bank of Canada. And the central bank has lowered its key interest rate by 25 basis points to 4.75%. And this comes after a couple of years of repeat rate hikes. Let us know what have those 2 years have been like for you, and what does today's rate cut mean to you? Will it make a difference? I'd love to hear from you on the open line, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Janine Rogan, a chartered professional accountant, entrepreneur, and founder of the Wealth Building Academy. She's joining us from Calgary. Hello, Janine. Nice to see you again.
Hi, it's nice to see you again as well.
What's your reaction to today's rate cut?
Honestly, I'm not surprised. I kind of figured it was coming.
Sure.
I don't think it's a huge rate cut, and I think that that's probably a good thing because I think they raised interest rates so quickly to kind of come down just as fast, I think would also kind of be detrimental to our economy.
What are the risks of that? Because that's something that Tiff Macklem, the Bank of Canada governor, addressed today in terms of why just 0.25 today, and he was pointing to what may come in July. But what is the risk of going too fast when it comes to interest rate cuts?
Well, I think with anything, with any policy, monetary policy that we're implementing, it takes a while for it to actually translate through the economy. So if we see a rate cut today, we may not actually see the impact for 6 months or a year. And if we cut rates too quickly, we might actually see inflation start to jump up again. And we all know, having kind of lived through that in the past year, what those crazy inflation rates felt like, we don't want to go back to that period of time.
Okay. How does this place Canada in comparison to other countries, other G7 countries, and that we appear to be the first? But where does that place us? Because, aren't our economies generally also tied to the United States, especially?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the U.S. does because we are so tied to what happens there. As a leader in the space of cutting the interest rates, I think it just shows us that we've been able to kind of get inflation under control. I know a lot of other nations, especially those in the G7, have also been facing the same sort of challenges that we've faced here in Canada. So I think, it is really a positive thing to show that we've kind of been able to stabilize things within our economy, and hopefully people aren't feeling as stressed in terms of not being able to understand whether or not, if they renew their mortgage, let's say in a year, if rates are going to be multiple percentage points higher, costing them thousands of dollars more on their mortgages.
We just heard from someone who's renewing in 90 days, and certainly, as he said, pins and needles as to what to do. I'll put this email to you from Bruce. Bruce writes, certainly one lens to view the interest rate cut is the impact on mortgage rates for those buying homes, but another lens is the reduction in returns for seniors trying to survive on their investment income, i.e. GICs. For every perspective you take on the news of today, there's at least one and likely more perspectives that ought to be reported. That is a really important perspective, Bruce, and I'm glad that you've raised it. What about, and it's a good question to put to you, Janine, what about people who have those investments? We just heard from the seniors advocate saying the biggest concern people have, and the senior generation has, is affordability. And so does this hurt them then and their investments?
I think it can be twofold. So we know interest rates are inversely correlated to bonds. So I would expect to see bond prices and bond returns go up, actually. So even though the interest rates on GICs might start to come down, so now would be a really good time to lock in those higher interest rates, we also want to make sure that we have fixed income like bonds in our portfolio to allow us to weather that risk as well. So absolutely, if you're just invested in GICs, there could be a risk in terms of income that you maybe previously thought you would receive and then not being able to get that. I do think that there's probably a bigger policy discussion here on the income supports we provide to seniors. But just when we look at interest rates, yes, it will likely bring down the returns on GICs, but you can kind of weather that storm by investing in bonds.
You talk about policy decisions. We have a federal government that made a lot of generational fairness in its budget this year. So for those, younger generations, millennials hoping to actually get ahead and build some wealth, what is your takeaway from today?
I mean, overall, I don't think it's a big change. I think it's probably a sign as to what is coming over the course of the next year or two. So I do think we're going to see interest rates drop, which is, I guess, advantageous for anyone who's trying to get into the housing market, because previously those interest rates were very, very high, but I don't think we're going to see rates as low as we did a few years ago, kind of during that pre-pandemic pandemic time frame, that 1.5 to 2%. I don't think we're going to see that for mortgage rates. So for young people, I would say, keep saving for your goals, whether that's owning a home or investing in the stock market, and make sure that you kind of are well diversified across different asset classes, because we know that these changes in economic policy can have impact on different areas of an investment portfolio. So making sure that we're really well diversified is going to help us weather that storm when it comes to different asset classes going up or down in value.
Janine, it's very good to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Janine Rogan, a chartered professional accountant and entrepreneur and founder of the Wealth Building Academy, also author of The Pink Tax. It's 12:42 Pacific time, and I have my two guests here with me. In fact, Steve Ng, a mortgage specialist with TD Bank, Murray Baker, manager of financial empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. I'd love to put that to you, Steve, her point there about interest rates. Perhaps don't expect what we had, a few years ago. And I guess that's why the shock was so bad, right, for people who had gotten used to near zero interest rates. Will we ever go back to that?
Yeah, it's highly unlikely. I mean, those are some extenuating circumstances that put us there. And when we look back and think about the speed of which the interest rates went up, they went up so quickly because as was stated, it takes a while for these interest rates to take effect. So when you increase interest rates, it could take 6-12 months for them to take effect. The opposite is true when you reduce rates. The economy responds a little bit quicker. But this go around, it's clear that we're going to take a cautious approach and slowly get back down to that 2% range. I don't think there's any question that the Bank of Canada wants to reduce rates, but it's a matter of when. Where TD Bank is anticipating that we're going to have another possibly 2 rate cuts before the end of the year, so a total of 75 basis points, and then some smaller rate cuts throughout next year.
And Murray, what do you make of what she had to say there about the impact on seniors when it comes to their investments? That yes, it might have an impact right now on your GICs. If as you empower families, what might be the effect on them and them trying to build that wealth? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd like to echo what was said, is that if now may be a time to lock in some of the higher interest rate GICs. It also happens that some of the dividend-paying equities as well tend to do better as interest rates are falling, because their yield looks a little bit more appealing too. So the main thing is to make sure that your portfolio is diversified, so that you're not taking the sudden hit with a drop in interest rates if those occur over the next few years.
Let's take a call now. We're asking you how the interest rate cut will affect you, and if with the easing inflation that has been reported, are you seeing signs of that? Are you watching prices go down? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And if you have the same perspective as Bruce, a really important point there, that there are other perspectives. It might be a benefit. It might also be a source of anxiety if you are a senior with investments, GIC specifically. What impact is that having on you? And I'd love to hear from you as well. Maddie is our next caller now in Port Moody. Hi, Maddie. Welcome.
Hi, how are you doing?
Just fine. Thanks so much for calling. What do you think of the interest rate cut?
Yeah, I got a mortgage in 2022 with the rate of 1.49 for $750,000, and the payment was like $2,600, and now I'm paying $4,000 with the interest of the 6.25.
Wow.
Yeah, my question is that is it good, because I have an option to lock the rate, is it good to actually lock the rate now, or better to wait a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're a similar question to earlier, but yeah, what are your thoughts there, Steve?
That's a crystal ball question.
Yeah. Well, you have one, don't you?
Have to dust it off. Yeah. I would say it depends on your individual circumstance. And if it's your primary residence and you plan to live there for a little while, your cash flow is probably the most important thing. And if if we're thinking that rates are going to drop back to that 1.5–2% range, it's just not going to happen anytime soon. Historically, mortgage rates, 5-year mortgage rates probably should be in the 4 to 5% range. And that's what we really should be resetting our thinking about. A lot of individuals that have taken out mortgages over the last 5 years, unfortunately, your payments have been set at a stage where it really just wasn't sustainable, which is why the Bank of Canada had implemented mortgage lending rules to qualify people at a higher rate. So everybody actually qualified with at least an interest rate of 5.25% when you took out your mortgage. So that was kind of that buffer that was built in to ensure that Canadians didn't get themselves into trouble. But I can appreciate if you have to renew your mortgage today at 6%, it's quite a daunting task. Yeah, I would say speak to your bank, your financial advisor, your specialist. And perhaps we can look at other ways, maybe taking a shorter term where we could take advantage of a slightly lower rate. 6% is probably a little bit higher for a short-term rate, but you could probably get something closer to the low 5s in a 3, 4, or 5-year term, and that may reduce your payment by several $100s.
Yeah, it's very much trying to see the crystal ball, as you said. And it's like, that choose your own adventure book, right? Like if I open door A, this is what happens. Door B, here's what's going to happen. We think a lot of it is speculation, but really good question there, Maddie, because I imagine a lot of people are in the same boat as you. Thanks so much. William is next in Port Hardy now. Hi, William.
Yeah, hello. I am an old guy. I came in 1951. I came to Canada, worked 1 year in the bush, and made $200 a month. Then in Vancouver, I came to Vancouver in 52. I made $200 in the sawmill, and I paid $25 for a basement suite. And then, of course, I moved around, worked in Port Alice, worked in Ocean Falls. Every time I came back to Vancouver, I had no problem to find a little basement suite for 1/8 of my income for $25. Now, obviously, the free market system has totally failed. We have to change system. We have to make housing a what should I say? At my 94th year, I lack the right word. It has to be not a privilege, but everyone has to have a right to have a place to live. The Fritz Schumacher wrote 2 books, Most Beautiful and Good Work. Good work, what is good work? The production of essential goods and services. We have too many people nowadays. They do all sorts of things, but that doesn't produce the essential goods and services. We have in the States 1 million people are writing books. Now in Canada there's probably 100,000 people. Well, these people are not producing housing and the essentials what we need. So we have to really do some rethinking, and
you're talking more about the
they quit in the 90s. They stopped supporting housing. There was air of housing.
The federal government, yeah.
And I myself actually built a few houses in the Vancouver area.
You're really taking us down the history too, right, of the North Island and the forest industry there, William. Really good to hear from you. Thank you very much. And you've brought the bigger picture into this conversation, right? The need for policies when it comes to addressing affordable housing. There's, working within the interest rates and all of that. But what about the issue of affordable housing, Murray? How is that affecting your clients?
It's a huge issue right now. And one of the areas certainly identified is seniors. Seniors don't have the option. Somebody in their 80s or 90s doesn't have the option of going out and taking on a part-time job to make up the additional costs. So one of the things we do with our one-to-one coaching is help people make sure they're accessing any benefits. So for example, a senior struggling being able to afford housing, there are programs such as the SAFER grant, which provides a grant to help offset housing costs. So we can help people ensure they're getting all the supplements and benefits that they're eligible for. But I would agree with the caller that definitely affordability has to be a priority. And I think we can look to models such as Finland that in 2008 brought in their housing first policy, and that's resulted in a dramatic decrease in the number of homeless. So I think we need to look at some other models and say, how can we implement that in Canada as well?
Okay, Murray Baker with me, the manager of financial empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver, and Steve Ng with TD Bank, a mortgage specialist there. Let's hear another perspective now. The Bank of Canada had its critics over the repeat interest rate hikes over the last couple of years, and the national union group Unifor was one of them. And we're joined now by Lana Payne, who is the national president for Unifor. Good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. What is your reaction to today's interest rate cut?
It's long overdue. I can say that. We're glad to see it. It's welcome news for sure. It will be a little while before you feel the full impact of it. And we're sure hoping it's not the only rate cut that we're going to see in the coming months.
What impact did the interest rate hikes over the last couple of years have on your members?
Well, huge impact when you consider what interest rates were doing combined with inflation. It was really driving a lot of things at our bargaining tables all across the country because it was both of these factors were making life a lot more unaffordable for working Canadians. You just heard from seniors. The same is true there. So certainly it drove wage demands at bargaining tables in order to make sure that people were catching up and able to deal with what was inflation, but on the other hand, interest rates that were just making life a lot more unaffordable. And we all know about the cost of housing, but many other things too. When you look at the fact that many businesses, for example, where Unifor members work, were delaying things like capital investments, all of this sort of thing, because interest rates were making those sorts of investments more expensive. So this is a start, and hopefully we'll get to a better place where life is going to be a bit more affordable for Canadians and Canadian workers right now.
What are you hoping to see from the Bank of Canada? You were quite critical of the measures and the metrics that it was using to stick with interest rate hikes. So what are you hoping to see from them?
We saw, I think it was 10 increases in an 18-month period. It was dramatic for people who were trying to budget and have a normal life, to have that kind of rate hikes. And we knew that the causes of inflation were not the things that the bank was necessarily addressing. I mean, if you look at the peak period when we had higher inflation, it was being driven by corporate profiteering. We all know what was happening in that regard.
Is there real evidence of that? And you know, given the effect on inflation that we're seeing now, were those interest rate hikes worth it?
Lots of evidence of that. And in the last number of months, for sure, since late last year, one of the driving factors around inflation was the interest rates themselves because of what was happening in terms of the cost of housing. So, you know, the so-called medicine was causing a bigger problem. And, you know, I think we need to have a big conversation about monetary policy in this country. We certainly argued that governments had to do more affordability measures to try and counteract some of this. Your previous guest talked about affordable housing. That's certainly one of them. But this has been a very, very difficult time for Canadians. The cost of everything has gone up, and interest rates only made those problems worse. And what we'd like to see, obviously, now from the bank is a continuation of reducing some of these rates for Canadians.
Very good to speak with you this afternoon. Thanks for giving us your immediate reaction to this.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Lana Payne is the Unifor National President. It is now 12:55 Pacific time, and we are wrapping up our conversation around the impact of today's Bank of Canada interest rate cut. This time, that's a change from headlines over the last couple of years, right? Down to 4.75%. And I'm going to wrap up with my guests, Murray Baker and Steve Ng. Steve, just a final word from you. You said, you know, here's what TD is expecting, a couple more cuts over the next few months and then smaller ones next year. What are you going to be watching for then?
Really, a lot of it's going to be listening for Governor Mecklen's tone and really where he is seeing the economy go and giving us direction. And I think that's what the consumers have been waiting for, is just really hearing what he feels is going to be that time where we can get back to that 3%, 2% range of inflation. In his press release today, I think he gave some really good indication, really good cues as to the fact that they are ready to potentially make rate cuts, but they're just waiting for a certain amount of data and certain types of data to come in line. So those are the things that we'd be watching for, and also to keep an eye on government policy and local policy here as well to help with housing.
And Murray, I just have about 30 seconds, but what's the first thing you'll be watching for?
Well, certainly we'll be watching inflation over the next few months, because certainly this decrease in interest rates, but if there's any signs that inflation are starting to tick up, it could mean that it's stuck at 4 3/4 for a longer period of time. Or if it ever did pick up inflation again, there's always the risk that it could go up. We're certainly hopeful that that doesn't happen. But certainly we're hopeful it goes down and making housing more affordable, because one of the things that hasn't been addressed is that we're seeing migration out of the lower mainland to places like Alberta. And that's not just here on the Oilers. That's because people are finding it affordable.
Yeah.
And we've also seen immigrants going to the newcomers leaving Canada and going to the U.S.
I have to jump in, Murray. We've done a show on moving to Alberta from here. Thanks to both of you for your time. Really good to have you.
Thanks for having me.